Hey, this is Fred Poole from Peavey Electronics here from Music City. So Peavey's been around since 1965, and to this day, so many years later, it's still owned 100% by Hartley Peavey. Hartley still comes in the office. He's kind of semi-retired, but he's still very passionate about this industry like he always has been. In 1965, his father had a music store, and Hartley literally started his company there, building one guitar amplifier at a time. And one of the stories, and I don't tell it as well as Hartley, I never will, but he had a custom salesman, I think, come in with an amplifier into the store trying to sell Hartley's father one of these guitar amplifiers. And Hartley, of course, had been noodling around and making some of these amps of his own. So when the custom guy arrived, his dad said, he didn't know anything about electric guitars, but he knew Hartley did. So he got his son and said, come on, check out this amp. And Hartley came around, noodled on this custom amplifier. The guy said, what do you think about it? He says, Hartley said, well, it's okay. It sounds all right. He wasn't trying to be rude or anything. And the guy says, well, so-and-so big boy, what do you got that's better? And Hartley says, well, I make one that I think might be better than this. And so the custom guy dared him to go get it. And of course, Hartley went and got his amp and wheeled it out into the room and compared it against the custom Roland pleat that he had at the time. And after he was done showing the salesman his amplifier, the salesman quietly packed up his stuff and walked out the door, and Hartley thought he had made him mad. Turns out the guy comes back in and says, I think I can sell some of your amplifiers. And Hartley says, well, I don't have any money to pay you, because I'm just getting started. I make one amp at a time. And so Hartley made a deal with the sales guy that he would give him this first amplifier so that the guy could have some money to sell and go on and show these things on the road. And that was literally the beginning of Peavey Electronics. Hartley was always very, very passionate about building great gear. It still is to this day, and obviously is my hero. So that's starting in 1965. The company branched out into a lot of different areas over the years, eventually making musical instruments and some of the most iconic instruments like the T60 and the T20 basses, and all through the 80s. Just about every musician of my generation, in my era, grew up playing some sort of Peavey product. And today, we're still making some of the best gear that we know how to make. One of the interesting things about Peavey that a lot of people don't know is they think that we're a little guitar amp company from Meridian, Mississippi, which is true. And we're very proud to be a guitar amp company. Some of the biggest stages on the world have Peavey amplifiers like the 6505 on them. But some of the largest audio installations on the planet are also Peavey products. So if you go through some of the largest airports in Atlanta, Beijing, Heathrow Airport, the audio that you're hearing in those airports and some of the amusement parks and casinos, all produced by Peavey Audio. It's called the Media Matrix division of our company. So we are literally all over the world. There's over 10,000 installations of our audio systems. So not only are we a guitar amplifier company, an MI company that we're really super proud of, but we make the largest audio installations in the world as well. So not only am I a fan of Peavey, I was a customer years and years ago. So I was a bass player, and of course, when you're getting started playing in any band, there's always the parents that say, I'm not sure I want my kid to be in a rock band. But my very first bass amp that I bought, my first bass too, was a Peavey B90. I had to save up a lot of money to get that bass. I still have it. It's a phenomenal bass. I have several other Peavey basses since then, but that's near and dear to my heart. It's something that I can still pick up and play today, and it's just as good as it ever was. My first bass amp was a Peavey Pro Bass 1000. My first Peavey is a rack mount, and I had a couple CS power amps and a 24 space rack as you did back in the day, and whole sorts of gear and I still have all of that gear today, and it works just as good as it did the day I bought it. And this car, that's really one of the things about Peavey that's interesting. Our competition is not only the current people that we compete with in the industry, but it's our gear that we made 30 years ago because it still works. So, yeah. So the 6505, which is originally the 5150 we made in 1992 in conjunction with Eddie Van Halenem, that amplifier has generated an entire new genre of music. So let's set aside the Van Halen tone and the Brown tone that Eddie had. The amplifier is so high gain that it literally created an entire genre of metal. So just about every album that's been a relatively famous metal album recorded over the years, it's usually either recorded on a 5150 or some amplifier that was imitating a 5150. And now, when we split with Eddie, I think it was I don't remember the year, but Hartley and Eddie had a deal. Well, he said, Eddie, you don't make my amplifier and I won't make your guitar. Well, fast forward, we know how that turned out. So we created the 6505, which was exactly the same amplifier as the block letter 5150. This is also a lot of folklore goes on about what the difference was between the block letter EVH version of the 5150 and the one with the signature on it. Well, it was literally because we got a nasty letter from Electro Voice, the PA amplifier company, that says you can't use EV, which is kind of ridiculous because we weren't making, it was a guitar amplifier, which they didn't make at the time. But so we just, instead of being, difficult about it, we just changed it to Eddie's signature on that amp. There were no mechanical changes at all, but everybody's convinced that the block letter one sounded better, primarily because there are tubes, the power tubes were different in that, right in that period of time, we couldn't get the old power tubes. So there was a change in power tubes about at the same time that those amplifiers changed. So I think that's where the myth starts of one sounding different than the other, but it's not because of anything other than the tubes that were slightly different at the time. But then fast forward to today. So we just recently re-released released a 6505 reissue. It's called the 1992 original. And it started because we had a project with Misha Mansour for Periphery to make his signature amp called the Invective 120. So Misha was convinced that the lead channel of the Invective 120 should sound like his block letter 5150 that he had from years and years and years ago. So we said, no, there's no difference. It's the same amplifier. He says, there's a difference. So we said, no, there's no difference. We've been making the same amp for all these years. He keeps saying there's a difference. So we compared the old block letter 5150 to what we had today, and we noticed there indeed was a difference. There was a missing mid-range growl. That doesn't mean the 6505 sounded bad, but it certainly sounded different. There was a missing mid-range growl to it. So we did a deep dive into the circuits and the components on it and noticed that the output transformer, which is a key part in any tube amplifier and the way it sounds, it shifted over time, so that the company we were buying it for, their QC standards and the way they were manufacturing had changed over the years. And though technically the transformer was correct spec-wise, it didn't exactly sound like the one that we had put in the original 5150. So we went on a quest to redesign the output transformer to make it identical to the original one. And then we had to even find a supplier that was capable of consistency in manufacturing, because that's crucial, because if it fluctuates at all, it's going to affect the tone of the amp. So we were able to do that. And then after we were finished with the Invective project, we said, well, now we've got to go back and do the 6505 and the 6505-2 and make them exactly as they should be, because, we didn't notice these things had changed over time because the amp still sounded good, but it wasn't exactly like it should have been. So we went back and fixed both of those things. And now I think we've got the best metal guitar amplifier that Peavey's ever made. And it's not just metal. I mean, there's a lot of genres of music that you can dial in with the 6505, but it's certainly famous for being the most aggressive guitar amplifier on the planet. And we're super excited to launch the 2 new versions of that, which are out now and available at Music City. Peavey Classic has been around in one form or another for a lot of years, and there are actually some amps that were called Classic that are not associated with the current Classic. Funny story about that, the Delta Blues, which is the 15 version of the Classic, is Hartley Peavey's favorite amp. So if you were to ask him what his favorite Peavey amp of all time was, it's the Delta Blues 115, which has a similar preamp to the Classic 30. So the Classic 30 is still in our lineup. We have a new Classic 20 combo that just came out now. It's very similar to the preamp of an older Classic 20, which didn't have reverb and a little tiny 8-inch speaker in it at the time. And we took the preamp out of that, made a 12-inch combo that's coming out this fall. We're really excited about that. The origins, the Classic 30 that we used to make, though, it did have a couple of issues. So it was a very complicated circuit board design. So we decided to make it easier to fix and a little bit more reliable on this next gen. And we took it back to its original cosmetic look too. So for a while we had a circular logo on it, and reason Hartley did that is he didn't like people taking his logo off of his amplifier. So we all get a kick out of that, right? When we see a Peavey amplifier on stage and somebody for some reason or another took the logo off of it. So Hartley was determined. He's like, you're not taking the logo off this. I'm going to make it impossible to remove. And if you do, you're going to be able to see that it's still a Peavey amplifier. But I think in doing so, it took a little bit away from the cosmetics. So we decided to go back to what it was originally, with the lightning bolt logo, big with a square TV front. But it's still the exact same sounding kick-ass amp we've always made. There's a sweet sound that comes with EL84s, you know, and it's a legendary amp for Peavey, and it always will be a part of our line. And it's really an underrated amp, because I think a lot of people will look right over a classic 30 when they're going to play certain genres of music. And if they would take a step back, listen to the sound of the EL84s in there, take a while to dial their tone in, they'll find out that I think the magical missing tone that they've been looking for all their lives is right in front of them, but it's in a Peavey amp. Funny story, we're going back to the breakup with Eddie Van Halenem at the time. Hartley made a deal with Eddie, say, hey, you don't make our amplifier, we won't make your guitar. So, and Hartley has always been a man of his word. I don't care if it's in a contract or not. If Hartley tells you something, that's the way it is, and you better believe it. So for years, when our friendly competitors decided to make their version of the 5150, we did nothing. We didn't make the guitar, and I say, Hartley, come on, let's make the guitar. This is ridiculous. They're not doing anything. And he'd say, no, we have a deal. And so I just kept bugging him and bugging him and bugging him and bugging him. And we had warehouses full of neck blanks and bodies and everything. When we shut it down, we just shut it down. And so fast forward, he finally gave in and said, okay, we can start building these guitars again. But one of the problems with building guitars in the U.S. that we were always encountering is we could build great guitars, but we couldn't build enough of them. So we could never get to the threshold of our manufacturing capacity to get to the point where we could make enough to satisfy our demand. So we were a little bit discouraged by that until I found a partner in the Czech Republic, which this area of the world makes the finest instruments in the world. I mean, they have fantastic reputation from everything from violins. Some of the best violins ever created were from this part of the world. Accordions, you name it, handcrafted here in the Czech Republic. So we found a great partner, and we were able to take all of the wood that we had for years, throw it on a container, ship it over here, and use these luthiers that are some of the finest in the world to make the best instruments we have ever made here in the Czech Republic. I'm really excited about it. So there's a limited number of these that are stamped on the back NOS. And if you can find one, you're lucky, because there's only a few made. And basically what that meant is those are the guitars made from the wood when we literally just shut the production off and left everything sitting there. So there are more like the original guitar than anything that is on the market today, because it basically is the original guitar, and some of the neck blanks and bodies were already pre-cut. So it's the real deal, and if you can find one of the limited edition ones, it's fantastic. Now, one step past that, we just started making a new version of it with a poplar burl top and a roasted maple neck, and it's just gorgeous. The poplar burl is beautiful. No two guitars are alike, so they're all their own limited editions, and obviously using roasted maple is an advantage because the neck is less likely to twist or warp. And that was one of the problems we had with the original, because these are bird's eye maple. And if you know anything about bird's eye maple, they are prone to twist and do all sorts of bad things. But these versions have graphite pultrusions through the neck to kind of keep the bird's eye from twisting. But instead of doing that, if you use roasted maple, it looks very nice. It's very, very solid, and it's unlikely to twist anyway. So it's kind of the right thing to do for the progression of the HP-2 and the next generation of our handcrafted guitars.